Franklin, Ohio, was a town that took pride in its quiet simplicity. Its streets, lined with tidy brick houses, felt like remnants of an America frozen in time. But for Michael Harris, a 39-year-old mechanic, life was anything but idyllic. Michael had worked at Thompson's Auto for the past 12 years, wrenching cars back to life for a wage that barely kept his own household running. His days started early and ended late, his hands perpetually stained with grease. He wasn't ashamed of his work, it was honest labor. But there were days when the weight of his life bore down on him, a weight compounded by Lisa, his wife of 10 years. Lisa had grown restless in their marriage. The woman he had fallen for, with her sparkling laughter and unrelenting optimism, now seemed like a shadow of herself. Her dissatisfaction wasn't subtle either. She voiced it in cutting remarks that left bruises no one could see. "Maybe if you tried harder, we wouldn't be stuck in this dump," she had snapped one evening, gesturing to the small, dimly lit living room they called home. "I can't live like this forever, Michael." The word stung, though Michael kept his composure. He had learned not to rise to her barbs. It wasn't as if he didn't try, he'd taken every overtime shift available, sometimes working weekends just to keep the lights on. But Lisa's expectations had grown out of reach, fueled by the new crowd she'd started mingling with since her part-time job as an interior designer. At first, Michael had been proud of her. She was talented, with a knack for transforming spaces and a natural charisma that charmed her affluent clients. But as her work drew her into the orbit of Cincinnati's wealthy elite, her disdain for their modest lifestyle became harder to ignore. "Did you see the Wilsons' new kitchen?" she had said one evening, scrolling through pictures on her phone. "It's stunning, marble counters, custom cabinets, the works. You'd have to save your paycheck for 10 years just to afford the backsplash." Michael had nodded absently, but inside, her words twisted like a knife. He knew he couldn't give her that kind of life, not on a mechanic's wage. He didn't need to, he believed they were happy once with simpler things. But Lisa's world was no longer about simple joys. The shift in Lisa's behavior came gradually. It started with late nights she attributed to work, then a newfound obsession with her appearance. She spent hours in front of the mirror, perfecting her makeup, choosing outfits that seemed far too glamorous for meetings with clients. Michael tried not to overthink it. Maybe she was just growing into herself, exploring new ambitions. He didn't want to be the husband who stifled his wife's dreams. But when Lisa began guarding her phone like it held state secrets, his unease grew harder to ignore. One Friday, as Michael scrubbed engine grease from his hands at the garage sink, a familiar customer, Mrs. Thompson, approached him hesitantly. "Michael," she began, her tone cautious, "I was downtown this morning and I thought I saw Lisa." He smiled politely, waiting for her to continue. "She was getting into one of those luxury cars, you know. A BMW, I think. With some man. They looked cozy." Michael froze, his stomach plummeting. He managed to mutter something polite before excusing himself, but the seed of doubt had been planted. The following weekend, Lisa announced she had a meeting in Cincinnati. She left their modest home in a rush, brushing off Michael's offers to help with Emily or pack a snack for her drive. After she drove off, Michael found himself pacing the kitchen, his mind a whirlpool of suspicion and dread. He decided he couldn't ignore it any longer. Driving into the city, he parked a few blocks from the boutique Lisa often mentioned frequenting. Sure enough, there she was, dressed to perfection, her laughter ringing out as she stood on the curb. She looked radiant, carefree in a way Michael hadn't seen in years. But she wasn't alone. A sleek black car pulled up, its tinted window sliding down to reveal a man Michael recognized instantly, David Lawson, a real estate developer Michael had met once at a client's party. He was younger, sharply dressed, and exuded the kind of effortless wealth that Michael could never hope to match. Michael watched, frozen, as Lisa leaned into the car. She laughed again, the sound painfully intimate, before sliding into the passenger seat. The car sped away, leaving Michael standing there, gripping his steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. At that moment, something broke inside him. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the confirmation of every fear, every sneering comment she had made about their life. Lisa had left him behind, chasing a world he could never be part of. But Michael wasn't ready to let her, or David, get away with it. Michael sat in his truck for hours after the black BMW disappeared, the city's noise fading into a dull hum. His chest ached, not from anger, but from a hollow, aching sadness. Everything he had built, every sacrifice he had made, seemed to mock him now. Lisa was chasing a life he could never afford, a man who embodied everything she believed he wasn't. But as the sadness ebbed, a new feeling began to rise. Determination. By the time Michael returned home, the house was silent. Lisa had called earlier, saying she'd be working late. He stared at the picture of the three of them on the mantel, him, Lisa, and Emily at the county fair 2 years ago. Lisa's smile looked genuine then. Was it? Or had he been blind all along? Michael knew he couldn't confront her yet. He needed clarity, proof, something that went beyond the whispers of neighbors or a fleeting glimpse downtown. If Lisa was bold enough to climb into David's car in broad daylight, there had to be more. He decided he would find it. The next day, Michael began his quiet investigation. He started small, piecing together what he already knew. Lisa's phone was locked, but she wasn't particularly careful about her receipts. While she was in the shower, Michael rifled through the recycling bin, his fingers brushing aside pizza flyers and unopened credit card offers. Then he found it, a receipt from the Grandview Hotel, dated just 2 weeks earlier. The charges included dinner for two at an upscale rooftop restaurant, far beyond what Lisa's usual meetings would entail. His stomach churned as he pocketed the slip. It was a small thing, but it confirmed what he already suspected. Lisa wasn't just dissatisfied with their life, she was living another one altogether. That evening, Lisa came home late again, her perfume lingering in the air as she kissed Emily on the forehead and headed upstairs. Michael didn't say a word. Instead, he waited until she was asleep before stepping into their bedroom. Quietly, he opened her purse, his heart pounding in his ears. Her phone was inside, but the lock screen stared back at him mockingly. He reached deeper and found her planner, a sleek leather-bound notebook she carried everywhere. Inside, her handwriting filled the pages, with appointments neatly color-coded. But it wasn't just meetings with clients. Scrawled between them were entries like lunch, DL, and drinks with David. Michael closed the planner carefully, his hands trembling. The pieces were coming together, each one sharper than the last. The following week, Michael took an unplanned day off work, telling his boss he needed to deal with a family issue. He knew Lisa had a meeting in Cincinnati that day. Instead of heading to the garage, he parked his truck on a quiet street near their house and waited. Just as he expected, Lisa emerged mid-morning, dressed far too extravagantly for a client meeting. She climbed into her car and drove off. Michael followed at a safe distance, careful not to draw attention. He felt like a shadow, unseen and unnoticed, as she merged onto the highway and headed toward the city. His pulse quickened as she pulled into the Grandview Hotel's valet. Michael parked a block away and watched from behind the wheel as she greeted David with a kiss on the cheek before disappearing inside. Michael gritted his teeth, gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles ached. This wasn't a suspicion anymore. This was betrayal, vivid and undeniable. That night, Michael sat alone in his garage. He had brought his laptop with him, determined to uncover more about David Lawson. It didn't take long. David was as public as a man could be. His social media profiles were filled with pictures of luxury cars, extravagant vacations, and smiling clients holding keys to multimillion-dollar properties. He was everything Lisa wanted, wealthy, successful, and unencumbered by a blue-collar life. Michael felt a sick sense of rage as he clicked through picture after picture, each one a testament to the life Lisa now craved. But as he stared at David's perfectly curated persona, an idea began to form. If David was going to take everything from him, Michael would take something in return. Over the next few weeks, Michael played the role of the oblivious husband. He acted cheerful when Lisa was home and attentive to Emily, all while quietly gathering evidence. He checked the house's online banking records, finding hidden credit card charges to boutique stores and expensive restaurants. He tracked her mileage, noted her absences, and scoured her digital footprint. What Lisa didn't know was that Michael had also installed a GPS tracker on her car, a simple device he bought online for less than $100. Every time she left for her meetings, Michael tracked her movements. The pattern was undeniable: David's office, his home, luxury hotels. The confrontation, Michael decided, wouldn't happen yet. Not while Lisa held the upper hand, assuming he was blind to her betrayal. Not while David walked free, enjoying the spoils of Michael's ruined marriage. Michael wasn't a wealthy man, but what he lacked in money, he made up for in resilience. Years of fixing cars had taught him patience, precision, and how to see the bigger picture when things seemed broken beyond repair. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Michael Harris knew one thing: confronting Lisa outright would accomplish nothing. She was too good at deflecting, too steeped in her lies to crumble under accusations. If he was going to fix this, if he was going to protect Emily and exact justice for the life Lisa had stolen from him, he needed precision. This wouldn't be a simple confrontation. This would be a dismantling. The first step was David Lawson. Lisa's lover had more than wealth, he had arrogance. Michael had seen it in the way David sauntered into his car, the way he flaunted Lisa like a prize. Arrogance made people sloppy. Michael planned to exploit that. On a cloudy Thursday afternoon, Michael left work early, parking his truck outside the office building where David's real estate firm operated. It was a glass-walled fortress in downtown Cincinnati, reflecting the bustling city like a mirror. Michael felt out of place in his grease-streaked work boots and denim jacket, but he wasn't here to blend in. He walked purposefully into the lobby, bypassing the security desk with the confidence of someone who belonged. A distracted receptionist barely glanced up as Michael scanned the directory. David's name gleamed in etched silver: David Lawson, Vice President of Sales. Michael rode the elevator to the 14th floor, his heart steady as he stepped into the sleek, minimalist office space. Rows of desks and private glass-walled offices filled the room, buzzing with activity. He spotted David instantly, leaning back in his chair while a young assistant hovered beside him. Michael didn't approach. Instead, he lingered, pretending to admire a fake plant near the waiting area. David was animated, gesturing with his hands as he talked to his assistant. It wasn't long before the assistant scurried off, leaving David alone. Michael turned and left, taking the elevator back to the ground floor. He wasn't here to confront David, not yet. Today was about observation. Learning the terrain. Over the next few weeks, Michael returned to David's office building several times, each time refining his plan. He noted the comings and goings of employees, the security cameras positioned in the lobby, the schedules of maintenance staff. He wasn't just watching David at work. Michael also tracked his movements outside the office, noting the restaurants he frequented, the gym he visited, even the luxury car wash where he took his BMW. The man had a routine as predictable as clockwork, and Michael took meticulous notes. Lisa, meanwhile, remained oblivious. She continued her charade, leaving for work trips and returning with a breezy smile, as though she weren't dismantling their family with every lie. Michael played along, careful not to tip his hand. He let her believe she had the upper hand, all while building a case that would leave her with nothing. One night, Michael sat at the kitchen table with a notebook spread before him. On one page, he had detailed Lisa's spending, thousands of dollars charged to their joint account for hotels, clothing, and dinners. On another page, he outlined his plan to leverage these financial records in court. Lisa had no idea that Michael was already meeting with a divorce attorney. Quietly, he had begun the process of filing for separation, ensuring that their assets, what little they had, would be locked down before she could drain them. The attorney had been blunt: infidelity was difficult to prove without hard evidence. Michael had smiled at that, knowing he already had it. The photos, the hotel receipts, the recordings from the GPS tracker, Lisa's betrayal was documented down to the last detail. But Michael wasn't stopping there. He wanted more than just a divorce. He wanted full custody of Emily. He wanted to leave Lisa with the debts she had racked up trying to impress David. And he wanted David Lawson to regret ever laying eyes on his wife. The opportunity came on a rainy Saturday. Michael had followed Lisa to David's penthouse yet again, watching from the shadows as she disappeared into the building. Instead of leaving, Michael approached the sleek black BMW parked nearby. This time, he didn't bring a crowbar. Instead, he slipped a slim device from his pocket, a GPS tracker identical to the one on Lisa's car. He crouched by the rear wheel, attaching the tracker with practiced ease before retreating to his truck. Now, he wouldn't just know where Lisa was. He'd know where David went, too. Over the following days, Michael monitored David's movements with obsessive precision. The man's life was a tapestry of indulgence, high-end dinners, private clubs, late-night visits to Lisa. But there was something else, a pattern Michael hadn't expected. David's real estate deals weren't entirely above board. Michael noticed frequent visits to properties that weren't listed publicly, meetings with dubious-looking men in dark SUVs. Michael began piecing together a new angle. If David was hiding more than just an affair, Michael could expose him, not just as a man who broke up a marriage, but as a fraud. By mid-November, Michael's plan was nearly complete. He had filed the necessary papers to begin divorce proceedings, citing Lisa's infidelity and financial irresponsibility. He had compiled months of evidence to secure full custody of Emily, painting Lisa as a neglectful mother more interested in her lover than her daughter. But the final piece was David. Michael enlisted Joe, the private investigator he'd befriended, to dig deeper into David's business dealings. Within a week, Joe returned with a file thick enough to bury David's career. "Your boy Lawson's not just rich," Joe said, tossing the file onto Michael's kitchen table. "He's dirty. Fake LLCs, offshore accounts, money laundering, you name it." Michael flipped through the documents, a grim smile spreading across his face. "Perfect," he said. The trap was set. Michael didn't need to confront Lisa anymore, the courts would do it for him. She'd be left with nothing but debt, while Michael walked away with Emily and the satisfaction of knowing he had dismantled the life she thought she wanted. David, too, would face consequences, criminal charges, ruined reputation, everything that came with being exposed. Michael had spent years fixing broken things. This time, he was letting it all burn. Michael hadn't meant to eavesdrop that evening. He was in the kitchen washing dishes, the sound of running water masking Lisa's voice at first. But when her tone shifted to something soft, conspiratorial, it caught his attention. He turned off the faucet, standing frozen as Lisa paced in the living room, her back to him, her phone pressed tightly to her ear. "Yes, tomorrow night. Same place as always," she said, her voice low but audible. "Room's already booked. I'll see you there." Michael's stomach clenched. He stayed silent as she ended the call and breezed past him with a smile. "I'm heading to bed early," she said. "Big day tomorrow." "Sure," Michael replied, forcing a casual tone. "Good night." As soon as she was upstairs, Michael moved to the garage, his mind racing. He had known about her trips to the city, suspected her affair for months, but this was the first time he had concrete proof of where and when. Michael's earlier work with the GPS tracker on Lisa's car had already revealed a pattern. Every few weeks, she would make a trip to Cincinnati and stop at the same place, the Grandview Plaza Hotel. Now he had the final piece, her exact timing. But knowing wasn't enough. Michael needed evidence. Real, Undeniable proof that would leave Lisa with no room to twist the truth. He picked up his phone and called Carl, an old friend who worked in hotel security. "Carl," he said, his voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath. "I need a favor." The next afternoon, Michael parked his truck a block away from the Grandview Plaza. He waited until Lisa's GPS tracker showed her car entering the hotel's parking garage before making his move. Carl had arranged everything. Using his connections, he had confirmed Lisa's check-in under the name Lisa Harris and provided Michael with access to a master key card. Michael entered the hotel through a side door, dressed in a maintenance worker's uniform borrowed from Carl. With the toolbox slung over his shoulder, he made his way to the 12th floor, where Lisa's room was located. Room 1245. He paused outside the door, listening for any signs of activity. When he was certain the room was empty, he used the key card to slip inside. The suite was luxurious, plush carpeting, a king-sized bed, and a bottle of champagne chilling by the window. Michael's jaw tightened. This was the life Lisa was indulging in while he worked overtime to keep their home afloat. He moved quickly, retrieving a compact, motion-activated camera from his toolbox. He placed it inside a decorative vase on a high shelf, angling it for a full view of the bed and seating area. The camera's live feed connected to his phone, ensuring he could watch from anywhere. Before leaving, Michael carefully wiped down every surface he had touched, ensuring there was no trace of his presence. Then he stepped out of the room and disappeared down the hallway. That evening, Michael sat in his garage, the live feed open on his laptop. At 8:47 p.m., Lisa entered the room, laughing as David followed behind her. She was radiant, her hair perfectly styled and her dress clinging to her figure. David closed the door, pulling her into an embrace before she had even set down her purse. "You made it," he murmured, his hands moving to her waist. "Of course," Lisa replied, smiling up at him. "I couldn't wait." Michael's chest tightened as he watched them move to the bed. Lisa sat on the edge, her legs crossed as David stood between them, cupping her face in his hands. Their voices, caught perfectly by the camera, cut into Michael like knives. "I don't know how much longer I can keep this up," Lisa said, her voice breathy. David chuckled, leaning down to kiss her. "You'll figure it out. You're too smart not to." Their conversation dissolved into whispers as their kisses deepened, clothes falling to the floor piece by piece. Michael forced himself to watch as they moved together on the bed, every touch and moan captured by the camera. It wasn't voyeurism, it was evidence. When it was over, Lisa lay draped across David's chest, her fingers tracing lazy circles on his skin. "Do you think he suspects?" she asked. David laughed. "Even if he does, what can he do? He's nothing compared to us." Lisa smiled, lifting her glass of champagne. "Here's to freedom." Michael closed the laptop, his face expressionless. He had seen enough. The next morning, Michael retrieved the camera, erasing any trace of his presence. Then he contacted his divorce attorney. "I have everything you need," he said, handing over the footage and a folder of financial records showing Lisa's extravagant spending. The attorney watched the video in silence before nodding. "This is airtight. She won't just lose custody, she'll lose everything." When the court date arrived, Lisa walked into the courtroom with a confident smile. She barely glanced at Michael as she took her seat. But her confidence shattered when Michael's attorney presented the footage. The video played on a large screen, every detail, Lisa's laughter, David's smug remarks, their intimacy, laid bare for the judge to see. Lisa's face drained of color. Her attorney sputtered objections, but the damage was done. By the end of the hearing, Michael had full custody of Emily, while Lisa was left with nothing but debts and humiliation. Michael knew he didn't need to expose David Lawson's crimes on his own. The private investigator hired by his attorney had already delivered a detailed report, a thick folder packed with evidence of fraud, tax evasion, and embezzlement. The detective's findings were damning. David had used shell companies to launder money and falsify property values, and there were records of offshore accounts and falsified tax filings. He wasn't just an adulterer, he was a criminal. Michael's attorney forwarded the evidence to federal authorities, who quickly opened an investigation. Armed with the private investigator's report and the footage from the hotel room, Michael had ensured there was no escape for David. Federal agents stormed David's office just 2 weeks later. His staff watched in shock as documents were seized and David was led out in handcuffs. The story made headlines, a high-profile real estate mogul exposed as a fraud. Michael didn't stop there. Anonymously, he sent a schematic detailing David's affair with Lisa and the financial damage he had caused to the executive board of David's firm. The fallout was immediate. David's professional reputation was destroyed, and he was promptly fired. David's trial was swift and public. He was convicted on multiple counts of tax evasion, money laundering, and fraud, earning an 8-year federal prison sentence. Lisa's life unraveled as David's empire crumbled. The court had already awarded Michael full custody of Emily, citing the footage and Lisa's financial recklessness. She was left with nothing but the debts she had incurred while indulging in David's lifestyle. Michael's anonymous schematic had also reached her social circle in Franklin, exposing her affair to everyone she once knew. Friends distanced themselves, and whispers followed her everywhere. With David imprisoned and her reputation in tatters, Lisa moved into a dingy apartment outside Cincinnati, taking a job at a diner to scrape by. Her calls to Emily became infrequent, each one laced with bitterness and regret. Michael, meanwhile, focused on his future. Emily thrived under his care, and their bond deepened. He turned the home Lisa once mocked into a warm, stable refuge, leaving her and David as nothing more than memories of a painful but transformative chapter. Justice had been served. Lisa and David had gambled everything on their lies and greed, and lost it all.